Now, former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan was accused of knowing about and endorsing the controversial SARS intelligence unit. KPMG South Africa insists there was no political motivation behind its report on the controversial SARS intelligence unit. Well, he joins us now from our Pretoria studio. Good evening, Mr. Gordhan, and thank you very much for joining us. Well, 2 years ago, you either definitely knew or ought to have known about that illegal rogue unit. Well, today, oops, that wasn't the intended interpretation. What do you make of it all?
Yeah, I think firstly, thank you very much for having me. And secondly, I think this is a very good opportunity to set some of the facts right, because unwittingly we in the media and in the public discourse repeat half-truths and untruths. So the first thing that senior counsel that advised us told us very clearly is that this investigative unit that was set up within SARS had a proper authority to do so, was set up within the law, and that its activities were also within the law to the extent that we were aware of the activities. It was neither rogue nor was it illegal. And you might remember the answers to some of the 27 questions that were put to me early in 2016, which were made public, which gave a proper legal basis for this particular set of circumstances. The second is that one can sort of half welcome this KPMG statement, but the statement falls short. It falls short of acknowledging that the damage wasn't just, what's the point in paying 23 million rands back to SARS when in fact so many very professional, senior and honest employees have been cast aside, have been left without incomes and jobs, and went through a whole lot of trauma at the hands of law enforcement agencies and others, and for which KPMG now says we don't take any responsibility. But thirdly, these reports and assertions were actually used to clean up what today we know as a distinct pattern of state capture, as the report from the academics on the silent coup and other things that it is called actually reflect very accurately, where you deploy, inverted commas, your people, you clean out the good guys after accusing them of one thing or another. You can see the events that have been taking place in the last 48 hours in the PIC also. And I think if you look at the pattern, and indeed, as we've said before, connect the dots, we can see that what was happening here Mr. Lakay, who very appropriately pointed out that KPMG International has come to none of us to actually say, what's your side of the story? What are your facts and information that we would have to take into account? So where's the audi alteram partem rule in this case? Thirdly, they say they regret certain things, but they've not communicated no formal apology to me or to anybody else that I know. And if there is such a level of contrition which results in them giving 40 million plus 23 million back as their sign of reparation and goodwill, then that's far from adequate in terms of the kind of damage that they've caused to democracy in South Africa, to key fiscal institutions in South Africa, and to individuals and their livelihood, and the long-term damage that this causes to our ability to run South Africa's finances on a viable basis.
If they were to apologize to you, I'm talking here about you specifically now, would you accept the apology and move on and leave it there?
But this is not a personal matter. You see, we weren't acting as individuals in this. I mean, it's now well recorded in history how that report was used, how various advocates were involved, how various firms of attorneys were involved, and there are lessons for other professional firms that are associated with some of these things. I'm not going to name them right now, but they know who they are, and they also need to ask themselves, are they part of this broad scheme of discrediting people and taking over institutions for the wrong purposes, and that might be resulting in some of the revenue shortfalls that we're actually talking about today. So the real issue for us as South Africans is, once again, here's an international firm with a South African presence which has actually willfully and wittingly damaged our democracy, harmed key institutions, and imposed a medium-term harm on South African people in terms of our capacity to use our own money and taxes to provide services for South Africans as well. So they owe an apology to the people of South Africa, and they need to find much more than what they've said in that statement to truly demonstrate contrition and explain why their own so-called ethical standards were not followed. And as I think some of your previous interviewers have also been saying, you can't say that we were given wrong information by our auditees, just to move away from the SARS issue, and blasé, in a blasé way, say that's why we didn't find the things that we should have found. We should have resigned from this account a year ago, and so on and so on. There's a lot more that's out there in the public domain about the way in which KPMG was connected for over an 8-year period with this family and its companies. What's the explanation? That 11-page statement doesn't explain that adequately for South Africans, particularly in the context of all the emails and the information that we actually have before us at this point in time. So KPMG has to issue another statement. We want to see the face of the KPMG International CEO. Where's he or her? Why are they hiding behind an anonymous statement? Now, you as the press and the media need to have an opportunity to question them face to face and say, what are we going to see differently? And how is your culture in the South African branch actually going to change? Change in the way you conduct your business. And as I said, this applies to other professional firms as well.
Now, in their statement, they say that they had no political motivation or intent to lead. Do you believe that?
No. Intent is one thing, and consequence is quite another. So by now they should be able to say, we originally didn't have the intent. The way in which our senior people conducted themselves, which involved, by the way, their senior forensic person literally threatening people at SARS. You either do this or that would happen. In my case, I have a letter from attorneys representing SARS that they were going to sequestrate my estate because of the Ivan Pillay matter, for example, unless I cooperated. Now, where do you just go around issuing willy-nilly threats of this sort? So they should have realized, like they're saying now about their association with this group of companies, they should have also realized in the SARS case that soon after they got involved, that they might have been unwittingly manipulated to serve a particular purpose, or their deployees and representatives were participating in a truly nefarious scheme, which today we know forms part of the pattern of state capture in South Africa. We see no apology for that. So dismissing the fact that you had no political motive is one thing. The effect eventually was political, because this was, as the academics say, part of repurposing institutions in South Africa so that they become instruments of stealing public funds at the end of the day. And directly or indirectly, wittingly or unwittingly, they became participants in this process. So the consequences were truly political.
Are you planning to take any form of action, legal or otherwise?
Well, you know, as the lawyers say, I reserve my rights. So this statement has only been issued today. These are some of the initial observations. Let the lawyers look at it, and when we are ready, we'll pronounce on that publicly. But I must repeat that the statement is far less than adequate in terms of the kind of damage that KPMG has done.
And from the conversations you've had with your other former SARS colleagues, are any of them planning to take any further steps?
No, I've been busy most of the day, so I haven't really had any long conversations. But as South Africa, as your listenership and viewership would know, These are good, honest professionals who were very committed to building solid institutions that would serve future generations of South Africans. They have paid a huge price in terms of jobs, income, and security for their families, and indeed political and other forms of intimidation. And they have every right to examine the possibilities of seeking some kind of recourse. And one would have expected an international organization like KPMG, one of the big four in the world, which says these are our values and these are our ethical frameworks within which we actually work, to be more forthcoming and say, we did have this negative impact, we apologize for it, we will interact with the individuals concerned and see how we could remedy the situation. So one way in which they could remedy the situation, because these are all very competent corruption fighters, is employ them. Make them a very useful part of the KPMG South African enterprise, and let them contribute their skills and their expertise to ensuring that any form of corruption that we have both in the private and public sector is counted in some kind of way with the addition of this new set of skills. Let's see if they're willing to take up that challenge.
Mr. Pravin Gordhan, thank you very much. He is, of course, the former finance minister, also former SARS commissioner. Stay with Newsnight.